And we are live on our very first Skype Department of Conversation. Joining us from Chicago, Christian Picciolini. Christian, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Pat. Thanks for having me.
Now, me and you contacted a couple of months ago. You are, well, I guess it would be fair to say, well known around the world now as an ex-white supremacist who is working in the field of addressing those issues. You are the author of White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. Apparently there is a new book coming out shortly, Breaking Hate, Confronting the New Culture of Extremism. Comes out 2020. You're also involved with a show on MSNBC called Breaking Hate. And I understand if people want to Google that at the moment, there's some, you're able to view it online for free. Is that correct?
I believe it is still online. It aired, second episode aired last week, so it'll replay again this week, but I do believe it is still online.
And now it seems that all of this all of this work that you're doing is coming from a group you founded called the Free Radicals Project. Pretty much surmised who you are at the moment, I would hope.
Yeah, no, great job. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, there's a lot of stuff going on. We connected a couple of months ago. Ironically, we connected with you about 2 weeks after you left New Zealand. You spent a bit of time in Queenstown.
I was there in February for my anniversary with my wife. We were in Queenstown and we spent some time in Auckland. And then when we got back about 2 weeks later, about 3 weeks later, actually, the tragedy occurred.
And so obviously I wanted to, get help. And I was about to say try and make sense of. I as I say that out loud, I'm aware you probably can't make sense of these sorts of terrorist acts, but we were trying to figure out, learn more, get information about what happened in Christchurch. Of course, 51 people gunned down, well, more than that gunned down, but 51 deaths. And I saw you talking on CNN, those sorts of places, specifically speaking to the Christchurch events. Sadly, since then, there's been a pretty significant synagogue attack in America as well. And with the apparent rise of white supremacist action around the world, I thought someone who was an ex-white supremacist who now speaks out against white supremacy, it'd be great just to touch base and say, what the hell? Without being flippant. Look, I think there is a lot of information about you online, but do you want to just give us a couple of minutes synopsis about, finding white supremacy and where you got there? I really want the bulk of this conversation to be about where we are today and where to from here. But give us a bit of a synopsis about how you got to this point from, I think, when you were 14 and first kind of delved into Nazism.
Yeah, I was part of what I would call the first wave of the youth neo-Nazi subculture in the United States. So I was 14 years old in 1987 when I was recruited. And before then, I wasn't, raised a racist. I wasn't brought up on this ideology. In fact, my parents were, and still are, Italian immigrants who came to the U.S. in the mid-'60s. And when they arrived, they were often the victims of prejudice themselves. So, it wasn't part of our family DNA, so to speak. But also because my parents, are immigrants, they had to work extremely hard when they came to the U.S. And they managed to open a small business and it kept them away from home 7 days a week, sometimes 14 hours, 16 hours a day. So I didn't see them very often. And even though I was surrounded by a lot of love, grandparents and aunts and uncles, I always wondered, what I had done to push my parents away, why they weren't there. So I started to get really kind of angry, and I internalized that frustration, and I felt alienated for 14 years. Even though I had all the opportunity, available to me, I still chose that route. But it wasn't because of ideology, I can tell you that. And I can tell you that that's not the reason why almost everybody finds that movement. It's instead because of a search for identity, community, and purpose. Nobody's born a hater. Even if you're raised in that environment, it's something that you have to acquire. And because people aren't, born to hate, I believe that they find it for other reasons. They find it for, a place to belong or to have some agency in their life. But, of course, everybody's searching for that, Pat, right? Not everybody becomes an extremist. So, what is it? And I think it really is, what I call potholes, those things that, appear on our life's journey that deviate us, that detour us to the fringes. And those potholes can be anything like trauma, can be poverty, it can be mental illness, it can be even privilege that keeps us in bubbles. And all those things, if they remain unfilled, those potholes, they can detour us. And when they do, there's always somebody waiting there for us with a narrative.
So, I mean, everyone finds their niche, whether it's the sporty guy or the skater girl or the dope head or the whatever
School shooter or the suicide victim,
yeah. So some of those niches would be seen as less harmful, and some of them would be seen as incredibly harmful. And you found an incredibly harmful one to find your identity.
I did. And at that time, I can tell you how it happened. It was 1987, and I was standing in an alleyway, and I was smoking a joint, and I'd started to kind of, be delinquent and angry and act out. And this man walked up to me, and he had a shaved head, and he was wearing boots, and he pulled a joint from my mouth, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." I have to tell you, Pat, I was 14. The only communist I knew was, the bad guy in my favorite Rocky movie.
Dolph Lundgren, is that what it was?
Dolph Lundgren, yeah.
Lundgren, yeah.
Ivan Drago.
Yeah.
And, I knew they were the bad guys, so I was okay with that.
Yeah.
I had never met a Jewish person. I didn't even really know what that meant. I was a Catholic school boy, and I suppose that we were taught that, Jews killed Jesus, so maybe I thought that they were bad. And even that didn't sit right with me then, which is why I walked away from faith at, 14 years old too. But I tell you, I didn't even know what the word docile meant, but I was willing to trade all of that just for a place to belong. It was the first person in my life who'd ever paid, more than 20 minutes worth of attention to me. And suddenly, I'd gone from powerless to this perception of power.
I'm interested in those groups. Let's look at the neo-Nazi one, for example, the white supremacy. You said before about people being raised, even if you're raised in that situation, you still kind of have to make a choice at some stage. I think of the Phelps Ropers for that disgusting church that's out there. Lots of the kind of Gen Yers seem to be coming out of that. So they're raised in it and they come out. I'm wondering from your experience, do you get more people in these groups as adults who are indoctrinated in, who find it as adults and go, this is my space? Or do you kind of get more who are raised in it and it becomes their life?
It's actually, people find it afterwards. So, typically people will find it at a young age. So between the ages of 12 and 20. But adults find it as well. And it really, potholes can happen at any life stage to anybody, really. It could be loss. It could be, a disability. It could be unemployment, whatever, whatever makes us feel, uncertain in life. And, if there's a narrative that maybe is kind of a desperate answer, almost like a lottery ticket. Somebody might buy that lottery ticket, and certainly there are salespeople willing, to make sure that they're selling a lot of those lottery tickets. We're living in a time right now, especially in my country, in the United States, where there's a whole lot of uncertainty. America has a problem with its identity, community, and purpose. We don't know what that is anymore. And we have a lot of potholes, historical ones that we have left unfilled. So, for us, this is a really dangerous time. And certainly what we do is having an impact in other parts of the world. We can turn on the television in almost every country and see, the growth of extremism in the far right. And so much of that is based on, the words of our president.
Do you see the growth of the far right? Obviously, we're talking about it growing in America, but do you see it growing across the Western world? Is it an obvious growth process at the moment?
Oh, yeah. Pat, it always really has been. We tend to look at these things as kind of country problems, but they really, this movement has always been a global one. When I was 17 years old, in 1991, I took my band, my white power band, to Germany to play in front of 4,000 skinheads there. There were always connections, with the music business and with movements, and there still are today. What I'm most concerned about today are some of the foreign influences from places like Russia and the Ukraine, where we're seeing, a lot of these more militants go there to train in paramilitary partisan camps. And in fact, the shooter at the Christchurch tragedy also was wearing a patch from a neo-Nazi militia, which is part of the National Guard of the Ukraine, called Azov Battalion. And so many of these partisan camps are sending Europeans and Americans and people from all over the world after training in these camps to go fight, on the front lines in Crimea, both for Azov Battalion and for pro-Russian separatists against each other. And that to me is very alarming.
I've had nothing to do with the neo-Nazi world. Don't think I know anyone that's involved in that world, unless, of course, they're sleepers. My experience is through media. I think about my formative years, the Russell Crowe film Romper Stomper, American History X, that kind of stuff. It seems that maybe 20 to 30 years ago, there was if you walked past a group of neo-Nazis, you knew who you were walking past. But it seems today, unless there's a group of them carrying tiki torches, they may be a lot harder to pick out from the general population. Is that a plan? Is that just a movement of trends and fashions, or what?
I think it's really a combination of both. I mean, we absolutely, in the late 80s and early 90s, right around the time that David Duke, the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, got rid of his Klan robe and put on the three-piece suit of a politician. And he actually ran for, the Louisiana House of Representatives and won, and served 2 years, and then ran for governor of Louisiana. And although he didn't win, he did get 30% of the primary vote for the Republican Party that year. So he was really the first one to go from, what I call the boots to suits transition. And we all encouraged people at the time, because we recognized that we were, too extreme for the average American white racist, that we were actually too edgy and pushing them away, and they were who we wanted to recruit. So we started to ask people to grow their hair out, to not get tattoos, to not wear boots, instead to go get jobs in law enforcement, and to go to the military to get training, and to essentially blend in and even run for office if they had a clean record. Of course, I didn't think it would work. We were a fringe problem at that point. There certainly, was a lot of death could be attributed to the white supremacist movement, on American soil for 500 years. But in the 80s and 90s, the white supremacist movement, or what's being called the white nationalist movement now, really was a fringe movement. It is not anymore, because that process of, normalizing it, and using dog whistle words and making their ideology even more palatable so that it fools people has worked. But I don't think it could have worked without the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States, or at least him running for office, because that brought so much attention, to them, that it really kicked a bucket of gasoline over a lot of sparks that were already smoldering.
When 9/11 happened, quite soon after 9/11, there was a list of safest countries in the world made. And guess what? New Zealand came out as the safest country in the world. And when that was publicised, I was working in media at the time as a radio talkback host. I remember thinking, oh shit, here's the perfect way for I guess at that stage it was a radical Islamic terrorist or someone, to make their point known, because if you can attack the safest country in the world, then no one's safe. When Christchurch happened, obviously you just spent time in our country, so you know a bit about the people and about the way, we all wear bare feet to the supermarket, which is the things all Americans seem to say. They can't believe they're in the supermarket in bare feet. I'm assuming that it shocked you, but I was also wondering, the white supremacist groups around the world, would they have been rejoicing in any part because it was New Zealand, or just because of the outcome? So what was your reaction when you heard about it, and also, what would white supremacist groups around the world have reacted to it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Queenstown was probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever put my eyes on. And, the people there were friendly, and the culture was, amazing and vibrant. And, I don't think that New Zealand was chosen because, they wanted to attack anybody there specifically. Certainly, there are mosques all over the world.
Yeah.
I think New Zealand was attacked because they wanted everyone to know that they could attack the safest place on earth, that they could, disrupt. Listen, Pat, their whole point is terror.
Yeah.
We dressed the way we did in the 80s and 90s because we were trying to terrorize people. We literally wore what we believed on our sleeves. We tattooed it on ourselves. We put it patches on our coats. We shaved our heads. We wore things that, would show people from a mile away that we were coming. Well, that's not the case anymore. The case now is they want us to know that they're coming, but they don't want us to see them coming. And that to me is very scary. And what's even scarier is, how rapidly people are, going from, essentially being, I'm putting air quotes up, typical to radical, and are willing to walk into, a place of worship or a public space and murder people.
Going one step outside the white supremacist groups, obviously, this terrorist attack in Christchurch got broadcast on Facebook. I want to talk about that shortly, what our Prime Minister is trying to do around the world. But then there was reports that over the following 24 hours, people attempted to upload that footage 1.5 million times. Now, I'm assuming that's not all white supremacists. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm assuming, because people have a fascination with, I guess, these kinds of things at the moment. You can see it if you just go to places like Live Leak. They're all over the place. That's the place that used to host beheaded videos from ISIS sort of thing. Is there also, like, if we go one step removed from white supremacy and look at the culture that actually has 1.5 million people trying to upload this thing, watching 50 people get murdered, what does that say to the culture, and how does that also maybe embolden the white supremacists to think, hey, well, people like our work?
Well, I have to tell you, as part of the work that I'm in, I watched the video, and I don't think I'll ever be the same again after I've seen it. It was to me, a video game of where real people died, shot that way. And even the manifesto that he left behind had kind of like this video game culture feel and this meme feel to it. It's terrifying to me that, not only this happens, but it's happening in places all over the world. What's happening right now is almost that they're trying to outdo each other. It's become, we've seen it happen from ISIS to the far right, from, within the far right. But I think that the gaming culture got polluted with Gamergate. And I really believe that this is kind of where this toxic internet environment started.
Right.
But I also suspect that a lot of those video uploads came from other places that were not white supremacists. I really do believe that they came from, foreign adversaries who were trying to essentially flood, the internet with what could be propaganda for them, that they were trying to pollute the environment like they, like Russia did, based on the election in the U.S. with, fake propaganda from trolls, that was discovered. So, I really do suspect that that we are fighting a bit of a code war right now. Back in when I was young, it was the Cold War, but I really do think that we are engaged in something completely different right now that we're wholly unprepared for.
Yeah, it's interesting because for a long time, let's say, and I do reference a lot of my political opinions to America. I follow the American political system more closely than the New Zealand one, because when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. So it's that kind of thing that I feel like you need to know what's going on there. But for a long time, particularly the conservative right, right back to the 80s and 90s, have been talking about the destruction of society based on video games or based on music. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, I have a PS4 and I play first-person shooter games, that sort of thing. But I've also seen the video, unfortunately. The realistic nature of those video games I play, I wonder, have deadened a sector of society to be able to see these images and not be shocked like perhaps you or I were.
I think they probably do desensitize us a little bit, just like memes do. There's something called mimetic warfare where, people are constantly seeing these memes and things like the Holocaust suddenly become, ironic. Uh, and that's affecting young people all across the internet. But I also really think that it's not the video games or the content itself. It's the players who are speaking to each other on these platforms
Right.
where most of the recruiting is happening. And
Right.
if you have a PS4 and if you're connected to the internet and if you're playing multiplayer games online, if you wear a headset while you're playing, there's a really good chance that one of those people that you come across someday is going to try and recruit you. And the way that they do that is not by outright, trying to get you to go, to a Nazi site, but it's by using certain words while they're playing, by using, the N word, or by saying things about Jews that might be insensitive, just to gauge your reaction, to see if you laugh, to see if you respond back. And if you push back, obviously, they just move on. They cast a wide net. But for those who kind of, joke back with them, who may, really not even know what they're talking about, because we're talking about 10, 11, 12-year-old kids in some instances playing, Minecraft or Fortnite or something like that, they really kind of get drawn down a rabbit hole that's a progressive one, based on how they react to this grooming.
Right. Our Prime Minister, and I guess not just our Prime Minister, but our political system, because a huge amount of support came along behind our Prime Minister, basically took action straight away.
Yes.
Supported by the nation primarily. I mean, there was a few people making a few noises, but pretty much supported by the nation. Sort of the opposite of what happens in America. You see a school shooting and the NRA turns up to hold a rally. From our cold dead hands, so to speak. But the latest situation, I'm interested to get your take on. Literally, as we have this conversation, there are representatives in Paris talking about what the world can do about this sort of thing. It's called the Christchurch Call for Action, and it's asking countries and companies to come on board to help put in place things to stop, for example, the broadcasting of the mass murder of 50 people. The United States has issued a statement saying they wouldn't come on board. I'll just read the statement because I don't want to, because it does say currently, so that there may be a change, but this is what they've said. So a bunch of countries have signed up. I think 18 governments have signed on. America is not one of them. And they say, this is a statement from the White House: the United States stands with the international community in condemning terrorist and violent extremist content online. We agree with the overreaching message of the Christchurch Call for Action. But then they go on to say the United States is not currently in a position to join the endorsement. So they've said they're not going to join the endorsement. And one of the reasons they've said they're not going to join, or maybe the reason, is it may conflict with the First Amendment. So criticism has been made of that because in the Christchurch situation, it wasn't a First Amendment issue because there was no speech. It was a mass murderer taking action. I guess if I was being a commentator and gracious, I could say there could be vile content in the future, which is speech, which they're worried about. But I'm wondering what you think of New Zealand's response to the initial action and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's direction, and now what she and we as a nation are trying to do to help the situation around the world, and of course the American response to it.
Well, I commend the Prime Minister for working as fast as she did. I mean, I thought it was amazing. Certainly, I suspect it's a little bit easier in a smaller nation like New Zealand than it is in the United States, where essentially for the last 10 years it's been a political stalemate, where we haven't gotten very much done at all. It's disappointing, Pat, to hear. I can't say that I'm surprised. I have to be honest. It's disappointing, but I can't say that I'm surprised that our current administration has decided to, not go along with this agreement, just like they've decided to pull out of other things and enforce, agreements that, frankly can't be enforceable. And now, potentially, is escalating into a potential war in the Middle East right now. It really kind of boggles my mind on one side to think, why we wouldn't try to at least understand and work on some agreement to where, if there is a free free speech issue, that we can work, in tandem and find a way around that. But, at the same time, it doesn't surprise me because, so many other things that this president has done, from, the very fine people comment to not even acknowledging, white supremacist terrorism is it's the unfortunate reality that we're dealing with.
Do you think, we talk about dog whistles, do you think that actually, constitutionalists may say we should really check this out to see how it sits with our First Amendment, talking about the Christchurch call for action, which means the statement that they're currently not in a position may change? Or do you think this is the White House's and the president's dog whistle saying, white supremacists, we're not going to squash you?
Well, I have to say it's a little bit of a dog whistle, because lately the president has been, kind of railing against the deplatforming of certain conservatives and far-right people on social media. So almost, in defiance of not going along with this agreement, it's almost as if he's standing up for those who've been deplatformed, people like Alex Jones and people like, other Nazi groups and other people who are spreading conspiracy theories. It seems like he doesn't ever want to support the victims, but he's always, rushing to support those who can be corralled into being some of the oppressors. This isn't a free speech issue. If somebody is live streaming the murder or, the harm of somebody else or themselves, that's something that everybody should absolutely want to take action on.
And I think from sitting on this side of the world, it's a bit like the new Green Deal that America had put out there. It seems that this Christchurch call to action is the beginning of a conversation. It's not we're going to lock you down and this is the final answer. So the thing that confused me is, why wouldn't a government, even if they had some concerns over the First Amendment, go, well, this is the start of the conversation. Let's get in on the start and see how it pans through. So that's why it seems a bit, a dog whistle to me at least.
Well, yeah, and that's what I mean. That there are ways for us to, to go along with this until we can, further net it out to understand what the implications might be. To just walk away right off the bat and not even want to play along to see how it plays out, I think is a big mistake and potentially an intentional decision.
There seems to be a lot of talk in America always about the Second Amendment, which we kind of referenced with the school shootings, etc. And a lot of that goes. A lot of the criticism from this side of the world, and obviously I am speaking somewhat ignorantly because I'm not American, I'm not in the culture or the system, but seems to go back to, well, these rules were made 250 years ago when there were flintlock rifles and it was a different time. You couldn't have an M16 or whatever, so maybe we should relook at how to reinterpret the Second Amendment into 2019. Do you think it's time to do that for the First Amendment? And one of the reasons I ask this is, in the UK, if you send a racist tweet, the police can and have turn up on your doorstep. When I first heard that, I thought, crumbs, that's a bit far. I obviously disagree with that horrible sentiment, but to say something abhorrent and have someone turn up on your doorstep seems a bit far. But it would appear that maybe within the First Amendment claims and culture, it's gone completely pendulum swinging to the other side. And maybe it does need to be readdressed for what the First Amendment is in 2019 versus 1876 or 1776 or whatever.
Right. Well, the founding fathers of America didn't have the World Wide Web, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or if they did, it was really, really slow. But, the thing is, things happen in the virtual world that have the same, if not more of an impact because of the global reach of it than it does in the real world. If somebody came to your home, and you lived down the street from me in Chicago, and if I came to your home and I started standing, at your doorstep and shouting racial epithets at you, and I started making threats at you, on your doorstep, the police would pay a visit to my home, right? I don't know how that's any different than somebody doing something like that online. Now, I understand where that could, become a little bit intrusive, a little bit out of control, and a little bit Big Brother. But I'm sure the police aren't, willy-nilly just going to somebody's home who's saying something insensitive. I'm sure, it's because they have cause, because of a threat, or because of prior history or something like that. And in fact, I wish that I could say we took those types of threats more seriously because so many of these people causing harm and terrorism have a history of doing these things. They have warning signs, except that we're just not paying attention to them.
Hey, I know that we're going to wrap up in half an hour, which is pretty much now. If you've got a few more minutes, I just want to throw a couple of direct questions at you, if that's okay.
Sure, you got it, man.
Can you explain to me, from your experience of 20 years ago, why white supremacists are so anti-Jewish? Because from what it looks like to me, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jews appear to be white.
Yeah.
So I've always been confused by that. What is it against the Jewish community that white supremacists, take so seriously?
So the basis of modern day anti-Semitism is really kind of all stemming from a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is an alleged leaked manuscript or leaked meeting minutes from a global cabal of Jews who were planning to control the world, right? That they were going to control finance systems and the government and media. And this came out. This was released in 1903. And it was, obviously it's a fraudulent document that was put out by the Tsar of Russia during the pogroms in Russia because he wanted to cast a bad light on the Jews that he wanted to essentially expel. Well, that book today still is the most influential book in the far right, but it's also very influential for radical Islamists as well. Because if you think about it, they probably dislike Jews as much as Nazis do, for the same reasons, that it's based on conspiracy theory and this notion that a small minority of Jews are all powerful and they control, the world. While I think most logical people know that that's just not true, and that we have Jewish friends who have lives just like us, unfortunately, there are some people, myself included, when I was 14 years old till I was 22, who had never met a Jewish person, throughout that whole period, believe this conspiracy theory. Now we have platforms like the internet to spread this lie. So we hear things about George Soros. He's just replaced the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, who were, the old, kind of butts of those conspiracy theories and those tropes. So now, unfortunately, they're still alive, and it's all based on a fraudulent document released at the time in 1903 by the Tsar of Russia, kind of as the first instance of fake news.
I was thinking as you were talking about how Islamic terrorism and white supremacists have a common enemy, quote unquote enemy, and it just made me think of that saying that I've actually heard the Americans use before in a military context, which the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I thought that would be an interesting meeting.
Well, Pat, I have to tell you that unfortunately, that's not a fictional story.
Oh, really?
It's just a matter of time, before they start working together. If you can already see, they're starting to mirror their tactics, from the use of cars to the use of, the internet and propaganda videos and social media and glossy magazines. In 1992, when I was still in the white power movement, we were putting out glossy magazines. We were making those videos before ISIS did. And so, you can see them mirror each other. But also in 1991, I can tell you there was an effort from Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to recruit American neo-Nazis to fund them to start a race war against American Jews. So, I mean, the attempt has already been made. And if you think about it, most people think it's crazy. Why would they want to work with each other? One's not white and the other one, whatever. But if you think about it, their common enemy, unfortunately, is this fabricated notion that the Jews are kind of at the center of all the bad things that's happening in the world.
It's I wasn't being flippant when I said that, but I was kind of thinking, imagine one day if, and you're saying, yeah, that's today. That's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, we have a case in the United States that just happened in the last year and a half where, and my recent episode of Breaking Hate just covered this. So if you do get it out there, please watch it. but a young man, a 17-year-old young man, was a neo-Nazi, and he was living with two neo-Nazi roommates, and he was there with his other neo-Nazi friends. So there were four of them. But one of the roommates had converted from a neo-Nazi to ISIS, and then he murdered his two roommates. And this is a group called the Atomwaffen Division, who's responsible for at least 5 murders in the last 18 months in the United States. So, we're already seeing evidence of this, and it's the same profile. It's the same identity, community, and purpose search. It's the same pothole, structure that sends people in that direction, flying to Syria to join ISIS, as it does to a neo-Nazi group.
Since you've spoken out and begun speaking out in your current group and previous iterations of it, has your life ever been in danger? Are you ever in danger from the people you're speaking out against?
Well, I think that, more importantly than my life being in danger, and yes, the answer to that question is my life is in danger all the time, is all the young people who are in danger right now falling victim to this narrative and this ideology. The internet has really made it a place where, marginalized, socially awkward, young people are finding their identity, community, and purpose in very, very wrong ways. And that to me is very concerning. Mm. So, Pat, I was willing to do really stupid things many, many years ago and put my life on the line. And now when I certainly believe in something very strongly and I know it to be the truth, if I have to risk my life to make sure that the truth is told, then so be it.
Christian, I've watched a little bit of your interviews online, and people who are speaking out against, for example, the alt-right, saying, what used to be called white supremacy is now called alt-right, etc., etc. But I've never heard, and maybe it has been said, or maybe, I've missed it. I've never heard a direct question and answer necessarily about the president, about President Trump. Mm-hmm. I'd actually like to know from you directly: do you think President Trump is racist? Do you think President Trump is a white supremacist?
I think he's racist. I think he's probably more of a Trump supremacist than anything else. Is he a white supremacist? I don't know. I mean, is he a racist? I think that, his actions speak for himself. Does he think that, he's better than anybody else? Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's interesting, a Trump supremacist. So the Trump brand and him and his family are, above all else, the superior, quote unquote, race.
A true narcissist family, yeah.
Last question. You know of the white supremacy culture. Obviously, what the work you're doing at the moment, especially with groups like Free Radicals Project, you're speaking out against it and working against it. Yeah. Do you have any advice for the New Zealand media and specifically about this upcoming trial and what they should do, we should do, to maybe not embolden all those groups all around the world by seeing this person who's done this horrific act, an act of terror, and encourage them? If you're sitting in a meeting with the heads of all the media conglomerates down here, what would you say to them?
I think it's a really important thing to learn about. I think, we shouldn't shy away from understanding the motivations of white supremacy. But there's a way to do that without being hyperbolic about it, without, inflaming, using inflammatory rhetoric to really denigrate anybody. I mean, I don't think anybody should be doing that. And yes, there are bad people out there, but we really need to talk about this so that we understand not just what the outcome was and what will happen, but we need to understand why so many young people are going, astray and falling victim to this. And that's what I would rather see our media focus on. They have the power to do good. They are powerful platforms that influence us every day. That's obvious. We've seen that, and I think we've become aware of it in the last, 2 or 3 years more than any other time. And I really believe that they need to use their power for truth and for good, and to share stories about positivity and change, and also on solutions rather than just always focusing on the problems.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, as you're talking, I'm bringing up a little clip that was released 4 days ago. One of our higher profile reporters a guy called Paddy Gower with one of our networks down here, TV3. His article says, I was ashamed and embarrassed. I have not done one story on white supremacy. So part of the New Zealand media is also going, we haven't even thought about this. This hasn't even been an issue. Haven't reported on it at all. So what you're saying, people need to be aware of this, but how we handle it is probably more important than what is said necessarily.
Well, we're all, I think rightfully so, we're very vocal and about the tragedies, and we've had enough and we want to see it stop, and we're angry. But I think we need to understand why they occur, what the motivations are, what sends people down that road. And we need to, as adults, as responsible people, focus on the most vulnerable in our communities, because that's really, there's no happy, whole terrorist. There is no self-confident, well-balanced, extremist. It does not happen. I've never met one, and I never will, because, happy people just don't behead somebody, or they don't walk into a mosque or a church and they and shoot 50 people. It doesn't happen, and we need to understand from the youngest age possible what's sending people down that road, and fill those potholes.
Hey, I've enjoyed talking to you very much. I have to say, there's been one thing that I'm a little bit gutted about, and that's that you and I were born in the same year, and I have far too much grey compared to you. I'm not sure you're obviously you're getting. You're obviously getting some kind of karma payback for coming back out of where you were, and that's disappointed me. But that's the only part of this, Christian, that's disappointed me. So thank you.
Well, let me tell you, Pat, karma is a bitch.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. So I've got a lot of it, but it's it's pretty great at the moment. Actually, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I had seen that you'd lost a bit up top, and I was thinking, I wonder if that is karma. You shaved it for 8 or 10 years, and now then that's coming back to bite you in the ass a little bit.
Well, I've been making amends for my past for 23 years, but somebody just had to make sure that I never forgot about it.
So Free Radicals Project is freeradicals.org. I guess Christian Picciolini will put all the links all over our Facebook page and stuff, so people can find you and find out more about you. And even though MSNBC Breaking Hate is probably not showing in New Zealand, as we've said, I'm 80% sure, 90% sure that I saw a headline the other day that it can be found.
I'm pretty sure that if you check my Facebook page, there's a link to some alternate website where it can be watched.
All right, an alternate website. Christian Picciolini, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming in from Chicago there.
My pleasure, Pat, and I just want to say hi to my New Zealand friends. You know who you are.